I'm just checking to see if you can hear me, Troy.
Hey Amanda, this is actually Rocky, but yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, good evening. It is 6:15 and I do see that we have a quorum. So I'd like to call this meeting to order. And we'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance by Dr. Weeks.
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Weeks. And can we please have roll call?
Susan Benjamin,
I'm here.
Louisa Stark,
Not yet.
Lene Almi,
Present.
Elora Diaz,
Present.
Carmen Trujillo,
Okay, thank you. And can I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. This is Susan Benjamin.
May I have a
This is
second?
Naomi. I'll second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. That the motion passes, and we'll move on to item A5.
Madam Chair, members of the governing board, as we move on to our work study session tonight, I would like to take a moment to congratulate and introduce our elected board members for January. Would that be okay by the board?
Absolutely, fine with me.
Perfect. So I would like to welcome you all to your very first board meeting before your oath of office, but still we're glad you're here. I'd like to first introduce Ms. Jessica Bueno. Ms. Bueno, are you here this evening?
I am. Thank you so much for this opportunity to meet everybody, and I look forward to serving our community.
Well, thank you, Ms. Bueno, and it's a pleasure to have you here. Mr. Carrillo, are you with us this evening?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Dr. Weeks, for the introduction. I want to thank everyone else for having us. I'm excited to be here and excited to support the work of Phoenix Elementary Governing School Board. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Vink, are you with us this evening?
Good evening. Thank you for having all of us, and I'm honored to be here to serve our community.
Well, thank you all for being here, and this is an important evening. It's a work study session where we're going to provide our community a lot of valuable information. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. McLaughlin for our work study session.
Thank you, Dr. Weeks, President Diaz, governing board members, and community listening in. It is a privilege to present to you a study session focused on our curriculum management plan with an emphasis on our assessment plan. Because our curriculum model rests on the concept of the alignment of the written, taught, and tested curriculum, we can't talk about assessment without also talking about curriculum and instruction, and of course, professional development. We also must talk about the curriculum audit because our curriculum alignment model is a recommendation within our curriculum audit. And at least 4 of the 12 recommendations from our curriculum audit include the topic of student assessment. So we have chunked the presentation into 3 different parts. And if it's okay with the board, we'd like to pause for questions at the end of each of the 3 parts, if that's agreeable to the governing board.
Yes, that works. And I also do want to add for our new governing board members, thank you so much for joining us. You'll be acting as an observer. So feel free to email us your questions. And once you're on the board, we'll be happy to continue to engage in this discussion with you.
Thank you, Dr. Diaz, for that clarification. Our curriculum audit was presented to the board in August of 2017. And as I've mentioned in the past, our curriculum management, a curriculum management solutions incorporated audit is not a pat on the back, it's a deficit audit. The CMISI auditors evaluate and provide feedback on school district systems and processes for managing all aspects of the curriculum design and delivery. The auditors write findings and recommendations for standards that they are assigned, and we'll go over those standards that are aligned to the most effective curriculum management practices and principles. Our audit consists of 17 findings and 12 recommendations. These findings and recommendations were based on data collected from focus groups, individual interviews with teachers, school leaders, district leaders, as well as student assessment data, and any and all written information regarding any and all district programs. It's a lot of work for a district to prepare for an audit. There's a lot of information to collect and hand over to the auditors. I would like to take a minute and just say that it truly was a privilege to be audited by CMISI auditors that were highly experienced in education, superintendents, assistant superintendents, principals, and even the executive director of CMISI conducted our curriculum audit. The C&I team bases all of its work on these 12 recommendations. Each recommendation comes with a suggested timeline. Some of those recommendations were to be completed immediately. Some were to be completed in a year. Some are to take 3 to 5 years. We will specifically take a closer look at 4 of the recommendations that include assessment within them during today's study session. And of course, we have a strategic plan goal that frames this presentation. Dr. Brown, do you have the presentation to share? Or maybe it's being shared and I can't see it.
Yes, ma'am, it's up.
It's up and I can't see it. Okay.
Well, Dr. Weeks, can you see the presentation?
I can, Dr. Brown. Dr. McLaughlin, would you like to introduce your team briefly on who's going to be speaking this evening?
Of course, I definitely will. Before we move on to the standards, I'll take a moment to introduce my team. So Dr. Shelman Brown is our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and she will be speaking this evening. And we have Miss Alicia Zelbis here is our Director of Special Education. She doesn't have a speaking part tonight, but she's a very important part of the C&I team. And Miss Sherry Zeeb is also here. Sherry is our Director of Federal Programs. We have Miss Ashley Zeck. Miss Zeck is our ELA Curriculum Alignment Specialist. We have Miss Lisa Fryer. Miss Fryer is the Math Curriculum Alignment Specialist. And we have Dr. Seth Alshire. Dr. Alshire is our Coordinator of Student Success. Did I miss anybody, Dr. Brown? Thank you, ma'am. Okay. So I mentioned that the audit is based on standards of effective practice, effective curriculum management practices. And that first standard is about governance and leadership. And the word control is next to governance and leadership. And this standard is about the school system being able to demonstrate control of resources, programs, and personnel. So things like board policy were examined, the organizational chart, system planning, how we plan as a district. Standard 2 is about curriculum and learning, or the direction that the school system provides. The school system has established clear and valid objectives for students, And things underneath this standard include the curriculum management plan and the scope and quality of the written curriculum. Standard 3 is about equity, equality, and connectivity. And this standard says that the school system demonstrates internal connectivity, rational equality, and equity in its program development and implementation. So in this standard, auditors are thinking about the 6 goals of equity, subgroups, and if there's disproportionality within subgroups, for example, our gifted students, our EL students, the MTSS process, or special ed subgroup, and professional development. Standard 4 is about feedback and assessment. It's how the school system uses the results from system designed and or adopted assessments to adjust, improve, or terminate if ineffective practices and programs. So this is where auditors examine student data, how the data is used to drive curriculum and instructional decision-making, and if there's a systemic process for selecting formative assessment tools and using that data to improve instruction. And the final standard, standard 5, productivity and resource use. The school system has improved productivity with the same or diminishing resources. And this standard focuses on academic interventions, facility planning, and instructional technology. So those are the 5 standards. And then recommendation number 3, this led to developing a curriculum management plan that coordinates and focuses all our curriculum management functions and tasks, as well as developing a high quality written curriculum aligned to the standards and aligned in the 3 C's, content, context, and cognitive rigor, to district assessments and state assessments. So in May of 2018, I had the privilege of coming on board as the Chief Academic Officer. And in June of 2018, we brought together a group of over 40 educators to engage in a 3-day training of how to write a curriculum management plan. This was a group composed of teachers, school leaders, district leaders, and we began the process of writing the curriculum management plan. And then during the 2018-19 school year, that group provided feedback on the curriculum management plan, as well as principals provided feedback on that plan. In July 2019, all district instructional staff received a copy of the curriculum management plan at our opening convocation. And this curriculum management plan is a living document. We do revise the curriculum management plan each year. We also did a curriculum writing training with a group of teachers in June of 2019 and continued to work with this group of teachers, of 18. And we continue to work with this group of teachers during the 18-19 school year to write curriculum. The board also approved during this school year the hiring of 4 curriculum alignment specialists who are able to complete the writing of the curriculum, facilitate the process of adopting new instructional resources, and provide professional development support in their specific content areas. In June of 2019, Dr. Brown became our C&I director. Thank you, Dr. Brown, for joining the Phoenix #1 team, and immediately jumped into curriculum writing with a group of teachers. In September and October of 2019, all C&I team members completed level 1 and level 2 curriculum audit training. Dr. Brown and I have completed level 3, and we look forward to our new team members that came on board this school year receiving that same training. So as you can see, we are well on our way to reaching this recommendation. A curriculum management plan was developed, which includes a formal assessment plan, and a written curriculum was developed that is deeply aligned in content, context, and cognitive rigor with district and high stakes assessments. And both are living documents that need revision and constant feedback from our teachers, our principals, in order to improve student learning. Before I turn it over to Dr. Brown, are there any questions on that chunk about the curriculum audit, the recommendations that we are working towards?
I actually do have one question. You mentioned the different levels of training that you and your staff are undergoing. Can you provide a little more information on that?
Sure. So the curriculum audit training has 3 different levels. Level 1 is about each level is about understanding the curriculum audit to a greater level. So level 1 is about the standards specifically, and then level 2 gets into the recommendations and findings, and then level 3 is actually how do you conduct an audit.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Denise, for clarification, this is recommendation 3. There are actually 12 recommendations.
That is correct.
Okay, so this is just one of the 12 recommendations.
Right. We are taking a look at 4 of the 12 recommendations this evening because those 4 have assessment embedded in them. So this was the first recommendation that we took a look at that had assessment embedded in it.
This is Susan Benjamin. Dr. McLaughlin, could you speak a little bit about Standard 5 and how it meshes with Standard 3 or with the curriculum management plan? Oh, no, Standard 2. I'm sorry.
Standard 2. Okay.
5.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So Standard 2 is all about direction. And so how that is tied to the curriculum management plan is the curriculum management plan has 9 components in it. And within each of those components, we're providing direction to our district, to our organization about curriculum design. This is how we're going to design our curriculum, about curriculum delivery. This is how we instruct students, about assessment. This is how we assess students, and about professional development. This is how we conduct professional development. Does that answer your question, Ms. Benjamin?
Well, and how does that link to Standard 5? Because that's hugely important. You're telling me about Standard 2. Tell me about how that links to Standard
5. Mm-hmm. That's a hard, let me think. So Standard 2 is about direction, and Standard 5 is about how productive are we as we move towards that direction. So this Standard 5 is about resources and how well are we using our resources to go the direction that we said we were going in our curriculum management plan. So are we ensuring that our interventions, because that's part of Standard 5, are supporting our curriculum management plan? How are we going about facility planning to ensure that we're reaching that direction that our curriculum management plan has outlined? How are we implementing instructional technology to ensure that we are going the direction we said we were going in our curriculum management plan? So Standard 5 is all about how are we using the resources to go the direction that we said we were going in Standard 2.
Okay, and yet on page 217 of the curriculum audit, there are the components of performance-based budgeting, and we are, at least 3 years ago, we were inadequate in all 6 of those criteria for performance-based budgeting. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So Standard 5 is about resource use, and of course, resource use and how we allocate our budget are one and the same. And so we did implement a performance-based budgeting process in order to overcome those deficits that the curriculum auditors noted on page 217.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, I was unable to be at the last meeting, but I was under the impression that we were kind of in a hold. What's the status? Are we going to be using this system this year?
I will defer that question to Dr. Weeks or Mr. Quintana.
Yes, I can address that. Good evening, Governing Board members. And on that question, we are planning to continue using the performance-based budgeting process. Right now, we're in line to continue for next year's budgeting process, which will begin in February, to continue the next year's performance budgeting section, if you will. And this, in the next few weeks, between now and January, we're going to get together and talk about the current plans that are out there that were approved in April this past year. And so that'll kind of get us going to a status of where we're at now with the current year. And then we will continue with the next year starting in probably March or April.
And so you're going to allow the board to decide based on the performance-based budgeting criteria what happens next year?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what that.
I mean,
can you rephrase that question? I'm not sure.
You have the system in place so that the school board gets to take action based on what the teams in the schools and in the district office all that have come up with and their recommendations. So the board's going to be making decisions come April and probably March and April about the budget.
Yeah, if you're referring to the performance-based budget process, the board will be involved in helping us prioritize some of those plans. So that's how they'll be involved like they were in the past.
Well, the system allows for, you have different groups and every one of them determine, what they think they can do with 10% less, 5% less, being even, being over, which would be lovely. And then, you go through a process and ultimately the school board gets to make decisions about the budget, which is really one of the big things that the school board gets to decide. So that's going to happen.
Mrs. Benjamin, we don't anticipate a change in the performance-based budgeting process in the new calendar year. We expect it to be very similar to what's been done over the past 2 or 3 years. So there would be inclusion of board members as they vote on items that have been ranked.
Well,
and presentations to the governing board from the department chairs.
That's wonderful, Dr. Weeks, because last year we received all those in 2 school board meetings and had to vote on them the same night. We received 5 of them. And so I do hope that they start in January and the new school board has the opportunity to have time to, especially with 3 new people, have the opportunity to ask questions, read information, process all of this before they make decisions in March or whenever that might be. So I do hope that those packets, those plans are started soon in January for everyone to have, because my hope is that the district is able to, based on the work that the curriculum, the CNI has done, that the number 5, standard 5, will come in and support that, because without having those 2 things working together, you don't have a curriculum audit. If you don't have standard 5 working as well as standard 2 and 3, you don't have an audit, Dr. Weeks.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that need to come together, Mrs. Benjamin. I appreciate you calling that out. A lot of it has to do with policy. A lot of it has to do with regulation. A lot of it has to do with fiscal direction and fiscal prudency. And so there's going to be a lot of conversation with regards to fiscal prudency in the new calendar year, I suspect. I think performance-based budgeting will be a part of that conversation, in addition to pathways to success conversations and some other data that we've collected and will continue to collect and present to the board and to the community.
Well, again, I hope that the board looks at standard 5, understands what performance-based budgeting is and how that works and how it makes the curriculum, it supports the curriculum. And without those 2 things working together, like I said, you don't have a curriculum audit. So thank you. I'm done.
Dr. Weeks, I have a follow-up question. Do we have a set date by which we will start receiving those packets? I agree with Ms. Benjamin. It is helpful to receive those well in advance since there are so many different departments.
Yeah, I think, I don't know that there's a date set, but I do believe that our department chairs are well versed by now in the process for developing the packets and can develop these packets fairly quickly. I am concerned that over the last 2 or 3 years, pulling 10% out of departments routinely compound. So for example, if we routinely reduce the department's budget by 10% over 3 or 4 years, you've reduced that department's budget by 30 or 40%. And so I want to make sure that when we do move into the performance-based budgeting cycle this year, that we're well aware that the decisions that we make, the decisions that the board makes doesn't impede a department so severely that they're unable to function their responsibilities to serve the district. So that's going to be part of this year's performance-based budgeting cycle as well.
Dr. Weeks, this is Susan Benjamin. Let me speak to that. Based on Dr. Hidalgo's request, I sent probably 41 or 42 packet opportunities to her. And what we've done in the last 2 years is pick the same packets. And so I would suggest that you expand that and that you have many more packets in that group, because you're right, you cannot keep, taking from the same group every time, because that doesn't make any sense. You need to look at the whole district. And so I would hope that you would take those 41 or 42 recommendations that I sent you and use those.
Yeah, I do agree. I think we would want to go back and revisit those 41 or 42 recommendations that you provided to Dr. Hidalgo. I don't know, Mr. Quintana, whether or not you have that information from Dr. Hidalgo, but that would be a first step in developing the cycle for performance-based budgeting. Identify those departments that have been hit regularly over the last 2 or 3 years and see what we can do to avoid those departments for this cycle.
No, I agree.
This is Dr. Diaz. I would also recommend that if we are going to be moving forward with this process, a standard template be created. I know that we tried that last year, but there was still a lot of variation. So I think that would be important to make sure it's just very standard across the board, and perhaps including a section where we can see what been cut from the budget in past cycles as well. So I don't know if we're getting too far off topic here, though.
Well,
it might be.
Well, I just want to say one more thing in terms of that. One of the issues, and Dr. Hidalgo, because I asked her to come up with what worked well and what didn't work well, one of the things that's been an ongoing process, we'll put it like that, is the cost benefit. And so, setting goals in a department, or for, let's just say, all of the office staff, what do you expect of them? What are the goals for all of them? What is the data that comes out of that? Those things are not in place, at least as far as I understand at this point. And I think that for Mr. Quintana needs to be a huge focus, so that when this governing board looks at the whole picture, they see the data. You have to see the data in order to make good decisions. And so I think that this is an ongoing process. You don't expect it all to work correctly the first time or the second time. It's something you build on. And so I really do hope that each department is required to and each group, each packet develops goals, so they can see whether or not they are really meeting those goals. Are they really worth the money? That's really what it comes down to. And I think the board then has the opportunity to look at that and make good decisions, because then they have good hard data.
Thank you, Ms. Benjamin. Dr. Weeks, we can follow up in another discussion offline and keep this dialogue going. And for now, we will continue on with the curriculum management plan. Thank you.
Thank you, President Diaz. Dr. Brown, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Dr. McLaughlin, and good evening, board members and future board members. I am coming here as probably the proudest CNI director in the entire country. right now, and I can't wait to show you what my team has come up with and showcase some of their talents. I think in regard to what Mrs. Benjamin was saying about, is it worth the money? Are we putting our money in the right places to make sure that we're getting actual outcomes? The CNI team did not exist in the capacity that it exists right now at the time of the curriculum audit. And so we now have that team of dynamic content specialists, and we have an amazing team of coordinators, and you will hear from two of our content specialists tonight for math and ELA, Lisa Fryer and Ashley Zeck, and you will hopefully be as blown away by their knowledge and passion as I am. And keep in mind everything they say to you tonight. We have a science and a social studies counterpart, Susan Benjamin and Amanda Arndt, who are doing duplicate work for for their content areas as well. And with the coordinators that you hired, I know you were expecting to hear from Brant Lloyd, our new coordinator of assessment. He's out with a family emergency, and because we hired the best of the best, we have extremely versatile coordinators. So Dr. Seth Ailshire is here to talk to us about the assessment piece and make some connections to a lot of our student success initiatives. So in terms of, did we put our money where it needed to go to realize the goals and recommendations of our curriculum audit? I would say when it comes to investing in your CNI team, you nailed it. We could not have a better team putting forth the work that's about to be unveiled. The challenge that our team had right off the bat was to make sure that we aligned our written, taught, and tested curriculum. What do we want students to know and be able to do? How will we know that they actually have it? If they don't got it, what do we do then? And everything that you're going to see tonight shows that we're working towards that. Something that you'll notice as a theme if you flip through the hundreds of pages of the audit in your spare time, because that's what I do, is that we repeatedly were dinged for a lack of systems. The consensus was, you've got lots of things happening, but how are they all working together in order to get your district where it needs to be? And so our entire focus for the last, I guess it's been about a year and a half that I've been with the Phoenix One family, has been on aligning everything that we have. We're not done yet, but I think we're off to an amazing start when you consider that we've been together as a team for a year and a half, with half of that team joining us in August when the board voted to approve coordinators. And so everything that you're about to see tonight is a year and a half's worth of work at most, with 10 of those months happening during a global pandemic. That's the level of support that we have and the progress that we're making towards meeting the goals of the recommendations of the audit. With the curriculum management plan in particular, Dr. McLaughlin mentioned that there are 9 components. We're going to focus most heavily on 6 of those. Don't ding me, Lisa. I can count, I promise. Because these are the ones that stood out as immediate high priority steps that we needed to take before we could do some of the other pieces. So you will hear a lot about our curriculum design and development, because a gaping hole in our curriculum audit was we had no written curriculum. It's a little bit of a problem when you're trying to run a school district. The curriculum evaluation and revision, it's easier to revise a curriculum if you have a curriculum. So we do have plans in place to make that an ongoing process, but first we had to write it. How is that curriculum going to be delivered? That's a combination of things that goes beyond instructional strategies and also into, do we have the right resources? Are we setting our teachers up for success? Professional development is something I think that comes up at just about any meeting that we're in that says, how do you set teachers up for support? Well, or how do you set them up for success? If we want teachers to be successful, we need to provide as much support as they think they need, and then offer a little extra just in case they want to circle back for more. And then the direction for assessment, I know, has been a topic of conversation across the country for years at this point. Why are we assessing? What are we using the data for? Are we assessing too often? And so our goal in all of these areas is to really build a comprehensive system so that every piece works together and so that nothing feels like it's just an extra that we're doing to be in compliance. Yes, we have some compliance things that we have to do, but if we're doing anything in front of our students or asking our teachers to step up and do things, it needs to be for a purpose, and that purpose needs to be geared towards that greater system that we think is going to improve student outcomes. Students are at the heart of every decision we make. We need systems that back that up. So as I mentioned, in only a year and a half, with 10 of those being in a pandemic, and actually this part came out of the midst of the crisis back in March when we first started trying to figure out what do we do to meet our students' needs and our teachers' needs virtually. We're building systems. You'll hear me say the word systems probably 87 more times before the night is over, because I'm a believer that when something happens, the show has to be able to go on. If I win the lottery next week and start a string of charter schools, I won't, I promise. But if I did, the good work that's happening in Phoenix L should still be happening. It cannot be dependent on a single person. And my team has built systems, including a CNI resource page. And so all of the great work that they're doing is housed on a website. There's also a public facing version with family resources, videos, that sort of thing. And so this is where we house our curriculum documents. When we offer professional development, this is where we house that professional development calendar so that teachers can click on a link, visit archived or pre-recorded trainings. So anything a teacher might need from CNI, instead of having to go all over or reach a specialist to try and figure out where it lives, all of our resources now live in one space. Thank you to our technology integration specialist and technology integration coordinator. Our tech team built all of this essentially from March through June so that we would have that central spot for all of our staff. If a teacher were to try to go to find their curriculum, they will now find a wealth of information to guide their instruction. So if we want to know what should a third grader be learning in the second trimester, teachers only have to go to one place to find that information. For every content area, as soon as they click on the math page, the science page, the social studies page, they will see a learning progression. Because again, we're thinking whole picture, not just one chunk at a time. And so they will see these grade level progressions so that if I'm the fourth grade teacher, I have a quick snapshot at what comes before and what comes after that we consider to be essential to guide my thinking, so that I don't feel like I'm only existing within my own classroom. They will also have much more specific curriculum documents. And so Lisa and Ashley will talk to you more about this, but they'll all have multi-page documents that talk about which standards are the high priority in that moment. Are there ELP connections? Is there academic vocabulary they need to learn? What in our new resources might support them in teaching whatever our essential questions or strategies or content might be? They will receive recommended instructional strategies. How could I teach this? Why is this important? So that's the level of detail that the team has come up with. And again, awesome team. We did begin some curriculum writing with a couple of different groups prior to my arrival and then once I got here, but without having designated people whose entire job is to make sure that the curriculum is right, I don't know that we could have reached this point so quickly and had a comprehensive document, K-8, in some cases preschool, in order to build from. So we won't say it's perfect, but we are really proud of what we've done, because we recognize that revision is essential and that we need that feedback from the teachers to say, yep, this part worked, but this part we need to tweak a little bit. Every curriculum content specialist has also included in their unit plans a link to provide feedback. So if a teacher teaches a unit, realizes that it all fell apart week 3, they can go right to that website and instantly let the content specialist know what did or didn't work, so that those revisions can be made in a timely fashion, rather than teachers having to wait until the end of the year or every 3rd year or some sort of rotating cycle. They can tell us right away so that we can look at it, see if it's a district-wide issue, see if we need to change it for next year, rather than hurrying to make all of those changes. So that's the level of support that's being offered to teachers right now. Again, this did not exist at the time of the audit, and in a year and a half, K-8 curriculum for all 4 content areas, and a nod to our special areas teachers as well, and Teresa Houlihan, because if you are a PE teacher, a band teacher, you have equally comprehensive documents. And I will say that as a teacher team, they have come together under her leadership to produce some of the highest quality unit plans and progressions that I think we could ask for as well. We also have a recommendation to develop a comprehensive system, essentially that leads us to making sure that we are offering solid PD. We are committed to having highly qualified and highly motivated and effective staff. That comes from teachers who feel confident, who feel empowered, who feel that they've been set up for success. And so they need to know, what are those approaches? How will this be monitored? How do we make sure that they know where we're going, how they're supposed to get there, what to do when they get lost, who can they reach out to? And so to that end, again, we're doing what I think is a really good job amongst all of the CNI staff, and that includes Sherry Zeeb, the title team, the special education team. There's a lot of collaboration because we've revisited our Mondays, and the Mondays that are now the asynchronous learning days currently with the staff PD in the afternoons. I think that doing that intentionally is going to really improve the opportunities that our teachers have had. With board updates, you've seen some of the various offerings that we've been able to put out so that teachers can select the trainings that are most useful to them. Additionally, we've been able to provide content-specific PD around the new instructional resources. When we did those adoptions, I think everyone heard loud and clear, if you give it to us, we need training to make sure we know how to use it. Having that designated time on Monday afternoons has provided that opportunity. But to make sure that we're covering all of the needs across the district, 2 of those Mondays end up typically being site-based professional learning so that schools can take care of those needs that are unique to their own school. Even though it's site-based learning, our CNI team is still available to support them. For example, our content specialists will create custom PDs if a principal asks. Our tech integrations team has been doing a lot of Nearpod training at the request of principals. So even if it happens on campus, on a site, the principal is not left alone to figure out what to do. He's able to, or she's able to reach out to the CNI team and say, can someone help me build or help me facilitate? And the team is happy to support that. Other times the principals have initiatives that they're ready to run with and they have a designated time. One of the Mondays every month is the CNI Professional Learning Day. That's the day we typically will offer PD that's a little bit more specific to content areas. We try to make sure that there's something for everyone to choose from. Sometimes it's a required ready math training because that's the time we can get everyone together. Other times they're able to pick what it is that they would like to attend because they
Did you notice, Dr. Brown, that you muted yourself?
Yep, pause just in time. Apparently my computer was saying, take a breath, Dr. Brown. So the CNI Professional Learning Days, we provide that specific content training, but also try and offer best practices, technology training, sometimes 95% group. There may be a special education training that needs to happen. So that's truly what is it that teachers might need that the CNI team can provide. And then we're also really excited about how we've restructured our district collaborative team meetings. Dr. Ailshire is leading the charge on that. We've had them before, but the change this year is that we are really working hard to bring those closer and closer to a true PLC model. And so there's a lot more emphasis and discussion on data, and he'll talk to you a little bit about how we're using the data and common assessments. But essentially, now every Monday, there's some sort of professional support available to teachers in addition to office hours that other members of the team may offer. My computer clearly wants me to pause, and so I think this is the perfect opportunity to transition to 2 of our content specialists. So Lisa and Ashley will talk to you a little bit about the work that they've been doing in support of meeting our audit recommendations. And then after they've explained their part, that's when we'll pause for questions again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here this evening, Dr. Diaz, Dr. Weeks, and members of the board and members of the community. As Dr. McLaughlin and Dr. Brown said, my name is Ashley Zeck. I am the Curriculum Alignment Specialist for ELA, and I am a proud member of the Phoenix L team for 12 years and counting. And then we also have our Math Curriculum Alignment Specialist here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Fryer. Thanks for having us tonight.
And our purpose for this session is just to walk you through really the cycle that we take as we're looking at improving the instructional delivery and the overall educational experience within the district. And as we're striving for that congruence among the 3 points of our triangle within the curriculum alignment model. So Dr. Brown, if you wouldn't mind going ahead one slide for me here. So this is really the cycle that we take as we're looking at our systems and our procedures at the district level. The written curriculum is what you saw on slides 7 through 9, where we're really looking closely at what the district content specialists have created from scratch to really help guide and support the instructional delivery and instructional decision-making within our classrooms. And as Dr. Brown said, all of this is housed on the curriculum and instruction resource site. So teachers have access to this very easily within our transition to the digital world. And something really important to note about the written curriculum is that we've used a consistent format across all content areas. That way we're building consistency across the district within our written curriculum. And as we transition to the alignment of the resources, you will see a very strong connection between our written curriculum and the alignment within the resources. And all of our pacing guides have been developed to be aligned to the board adopted curriculum resources. Specifically for ELA, for 7th and 8th grade, we have McGraw-Hill Study Sync, and we're in year 1 of that adoption. And then for K-6 ELA, that would be our benchmark advanced resources. And then on the math side of things,
right, for the instructional resources for math is Ready Classroom Mathematics is our core program for K-8, alongside iReady, which is the digital component, which is mainly used for intervention. And you will see there is a plethora of components within the math resources that are aligned and referenced in that written curriculum. So the things like EL strategies and differentiated instruction and performance tests and assessments. All of those pieces of the resources are noted in the written curriculum, so the teachers can find those pieces quite easily.
So once we take a look at our written curriculum and then the alignment to the board adopted resources, we start to craft our professional development plan. And we've also taken input from the teachers as to the topics and the ideas that they're willing and wanting to explore. So with all that in mind, we've put together specific plans for each of our content resources. For 7th and 8th grade Study Sync, we started this exploration in the summer. So July, we offered an optional professional development for teachers where they could come in the summer, get some time with the resource, explore the platform. That way they were most prepared to take on the students at the beginning of the year in the digital world. From there, we offered an initial implementation where we brought in a Study Sync implementation specialist to deliver a professional development for our teachers at the very beginning of the year. And then as Dr. Brown laid out, we do have our CNI Mondays where we've offered a variety of different learning formats for teachers, some synchronous, some asynchronous. We've offered office hours for teachers to come together and ask questions, and we've even brought in a Study Sync representative to be there at that time. So we were all bouncing ideas off of each other. In addition to that, we've offered collaboration time. So taking a time from our professional development where teachers can come together and bounce ideas back and forth within each other across the district. In addition to that, we have had some trainings where we've asked Study Sync to come in and do some specific training tailored to special education students and our multilingual learners within the district. And we've recorded that and then pushed it out to everyone so they had access to that information. Our upcoming opportunity for teachers will be this coming Monday, December 7th, and teachers will be required to come to a training where we're going to dive deeper into the Study Sync resources with a Study Sync implementation specialist, and really with that lens of digital learning, looking at how we're going to engage students digitally, how we're going to get students to write digitally. So we have that as our upcoming opportunity. And important to note within our professional development, we are using some of our district CTM time to talk about the resource and develop within the resource among groups of teachers around the district. So on the benchmark side of things, which would be our K-6 ELA, we've offered professional development in a variety of different ways here as well. This is not year 1 of our benchmark adoption, so teachers are coming into this year with background knowledge with this curriculum resource. One of my favorite opportunities that we have offered this year was a professional development towards the beginning of the year, where we used benchmark advanced resources for a primary instructional lesson, but we looked at it through the lens of English language learners. So we took the benchmark resources and married it with those English language proficiency standards and really had teachers take a look at digital instruction within our board adopted curriculum resources with the lens of language learners. So we really brought it all together and created an opportunity for teachers to see a variety of different things within one professional development. Just like our Study Sync teachers in 7th and 8th grade, our K-6 teachers have also had the opportunity to engage in synchronous and asynchronous professional development within our C&I Mondays, where we've offered out collaborative time for teachers, we've offered out office hours, and then we've done some live training sessions as well, where I have walked them through some of the benchmark content. And our upcoming opportunity for K-6 will be within Benchmark Advance, which comes within Benchmark Universe, which is the online platform. And teachers will be accessing Benchmark Universe to take a look at the priority standards within their grade levels. So within the space of digital learning, what are those high impact standards that we can really focus on and get that big bang for our buck? So that will be our most upcoming opportunity for teachers. And again, in our district collaborative team meetings, Benchmark Advance is a topic of conversation there, ways to develop our understanding and go beyond what we have and really work within each other and our ideas. So at this point, I wanted to turn it over to Lisa, and she will share some of the same opportunities on the math side of things.
Right, so as you know, the math resource, this is the first year of adoption, which is a little difficult in the virtual world, but we are managing just fine. So if we go back to a year ago, a little over a year ago, we started all these meetings with teachers. Every teacher was invited. We had about 60 teachers come to 2 different meetings, and we asked for their input on what they were looking for in a resource. And one thing that we heard loud and clear, which Dr. Brown mentioned earlier, I think she used the same phrase, is that they wanted professional development ongoing throughout the year. Absolutely not a one and done. That was not going to cut it. So we heard that, and we were super proud, or we are super proud, that we have purchased a very comprehensive professional development package through the iReady vendors and their trainers. So specifically, just like with the ELA, we offered an optional session in June, which we had a little over 100 teachers attend, so that was exciting. And then we have offered 4.5 hours required in July, 3 hours required in September, 2 hours required in November. So at this point in time, the teachers have received almost 10 hours of specific instruction on how to use the math resource, all the different instructional strategies, how to read and understand the data, what to do with the data. So that's all been very exciting. Like Ashley mentioned, on December 7th, we have another one coming up. This is not a vendor run one. This is one in which myself and our English language acquisition specialist, Kristen Kleider, and I are collaborating on an asynchronous professional development opportunity for the teachers to see how we can blend together a math lesson, making sure we're meeting the needs of our EL students, as well as using Nearpod, which is a really cool online engagement tool. Upcoming in the spring, we have another professional development, actually in February. And then one in the spring, which I'm really excited about, is called Tailored Support. And so in that instance, what I will be doing is contacting each principal individually and getting their feedback on how it's going, how the implementation of the math curriculum is going at their school, and what are the needs of their teachers specifically. And then the vendor, the trainer, will then take that information and tailor a professional development specifically for that school. So if Bethune wants something more on how to work with the data, where Capital wants something more to work with, let's say the English language learners and how we can help them within the resource, or another school wants to talk more about how to increase their math dialogue among students, the professional development will meet the needs of those sites. And I failed to mention, we did offer also actually 3 sessions with leaders. So the trainers from Ready Classroom came in and talked to all of the principals in IESs 3 different times to make sure that they understood what they were looking for when they walked into a classroom, and how to read the data and how to support their teachers with the implementation.
So as you can see, we're overall very optimistic and passionate about the professional learning opportunities that we are offering to the teachers within the district and ways that we can collaborate with each other to draw on that collective knowledge that we're all bringing to the table. So as we move over to the assessment and data review section, we're always trying to find new ways to build our own practices and ways to work without or work with others to involve their teaching practices as well. And one way that we have promoted this data collection and reflection within the district and among teachers is the content specialists have created Google calendars that have the content pacing for each different content area, as well as the assessment calendar. So all teachers now have access to the pacing and the assessment guide. So we are all on the same page. And it's an assessment range. So it's not on one specific day, but there is a range in there where we're collecting this information. And so that common assessment that we are giving now drives conversations within our district collaborative team meetings, within some of our professional development settings. And that common assessment that we are using among grade levels actually happens to be the assessment within our board adopted resources. So we are using the resources that we have spent so much time vetting and finding that we're going to be beneficial to our students. And now we're using the assessment within there to see how our students are doing. So we think that that's a very important way to bring everything back together, looking at our written curriculum and how it aligns to the resources, and then using that professional learning that we've been doing to really see how it's benefiting our students. So as we move into that final phase where we're reviewing, revisiting, and revising, this really finishes out the cycle. And we're all about taking advantage of the opportunities to collect information about our effectiveness as a C&I team and our systems and our procedures. And with the leadership of Dr. Ailshire, as Dr. Brown mentioned, we have structured our district collaborative team meetings so we are able to reflect on and analyze a lot of the instructional methods and the content delivery and really monitor that student learning within our written curriculum and within our board adopted resources. And then we're using that information from the district collaborative team meetings to really extend our reach within the district and really create that positive change with many voices involved. And as Dr. Brown mentioned, we also have within our pacing guides a link for teachers to give feedback or send comments, questions, and reach out to the specialists as they are working within that written curriculum. So really bringing it all back around, and then we take that feedback and use it to deepen our understanding of teacher and student needs. So we are taking what we have created and making it even better the next time around. And so overall, we're improving the educational experience for all stakeholders within our district. And so at this time, I would love to turn it back over to Lisa as we look through some of the math specific elements and details of our distance learning plan.
Can I ask a question really quickly?
Absolutely.
You mentioned getting continuous feedback. Do you guys have a specific, maybe I missed this, but do you guys have a specific system for getting feedback from teachers on how these resources are working and their professional development needs?
Absolutely. We do have the link embedded into the written curriculum, so teachers are submitting feedback that way. In addition to that, after each one of our professional development sessions, we do send out a Google form where we're collecting information about who was in attendance, what topics they were most interested in, and what feedback they're taking away from it. And in addition to that, we're asking for topics they're interested in learning about in the future, and then always asking for questions and feedback about the curriculum resources and anything within the written curriculum itself.
Great, thank you. This is very comprehensive. I really appreciate hearing this breakdown. Thank you.
This is Susan Benjamin. I have a question too. I know professional development in the past has always been a sore point for teachers. I've heard about it a lot in terms of not having an alignment. So I'm really pleased. And I know you all have been working very hard to put all this together. It's clear that you understand what you're doing and you're working hard to put everything in place. But my only question is, how do you decide when professional development is mandatory and when it's just optional?
So a lot of that depends on the content being offered. With the digital learning space that we are in, even for professional learning, there are times where Ms. Fryer has had a ready math professional development, knowing that it is a new resource. We're asking teachers who are teaching math to go to that professional development. Now, if there is an opportunity for teachers to have a choice between something within ELA, something within maybe a digital resource like Nearpod, we did want to offer teachers some choice in their learning. So if there is an instance where it is a new resource and a vendor offered PD, we tend to make those the mandatory ones with a little more flexibility when it comes to district offered PD, but there are times where we are asking those to be mandatory as well, given the audience that we're speaking to.
And thank you. And that makes sense to me. And my follow-up is, so is this training, this professional development sometimes after school? And do the teachers get paid for this?
The trainings that we've offered for the majority so far have been on those Mondays. So they are during the contract day. The ones that we offered in the summer in June, they were off contract, so it was optional, so they did get paid if they wanted to attend.
And so it was optional for them to attend, and they were paid for that time, correct?
Yes, that is correct. If it was during June off contract, yes.
So if it was optional, how did the other people that didn't attend, how did they make that up?
Well, they didn't necessarily have to make that up. For example, the math one was just kind of an overview. It was an hour and a half. And so that really allowed the teachers to kind of get excited about the material and get into it a little early for the go-getters. And some of them really craved that and wanted. I had 120 teachers attend that. So then when they came back in July, they attended a 4.5 hour required. And so some of that, those teachers that went in June, some of it was they had heard for a second time. But they didn't necessarily have to make that up, right?
And so you probably can't give me a number, but how many people are attending like this optional thing in the summertime, a percentage? And just a rough.
The math one, I had about 120, if I remember correctly, math teachers. It could have been math, it could have been special ed teachers. It was about half from what has been coming to my mandatory ones. Not bad. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for ELA, our summer optional training, I believe that we had 11 schools represented for 7th and 8th grade ELA for Study Sync.
Thank you.
Yeah, and in addition to that, one thing that the digital learning space has afforded us is the opportunity to record some of these professional developments. So there are many times where what we are offering, we're also recording, and then we'll put it together in a slide and send it out to teachers that they could view on their own if they so choose. So there usually is a digital record of these professional developments that teachers could go back and view.
Great, that's a great idea. Thank you.
Ms. Benjamin, if I could add, Dr. Brown mentioned that you'll hear a lot about systems. We do have systems in place, a system in place for when a teacher misses a mandatory math PD, for example. We have the list of names of teachers that should be attending these trainings. And if a teacher should miss, and we know things happen and sometimes folks can't show up, emergencies occur, Ms. Fryer informs the teacher, the principal, and provides a makeup session. Because we do feel like we wouldn't make it mandatory if we didn't think it was going to impact student learning in a very impactful way. So we do have a system for following up on attendance for mandatory professional learning.
Great. Well, I'm all about systems, so systems work. So thank you.
This is Lene Almy. I just have one question. I was curious about whether there's someone, possibly the curriculum specialist, possibly teachers, who's going through and adapting some of the resources that are provided so that they better fit digital instruction and online engagement strategies. For example, if there's a direct instruction lesson, it's translated into a Nearpod. And if there's a way for teachers to get those resources. And then also, if teachers are the ones who are adapting those resources, is there a way for them to share them so that not every teacher has to adapt?
I think there are some adaptations that are put out by Benchmark Advance. So speaking to the K-6 adopted resource, teachers are able to take what Benchmark has adapted and then further adapt it themselves. So it is my understanding that teachers are doing that sometimes on their own, sometimes collaborating with other team members within the district. So that would be the way that they are sharing. We've also offered collaborative office hours where teachers are able to join, for example, a Zoom session that I would host, but everyone's coming together to share ideas. So we have had teachers show up to something like that and share some of their resources and ideas as a way of collaborating.
Okay, thank you. Would you say that most teachers are generally on the same like calendar area, so they're teaching the same things at the same time across schools?
We have it set up in our pacing guides and our pacing calendars for it to be that way. We are noticing that there is a little differentiation in where teachers are at this point because of the digital learning space. However, our units within Benchmark Advance are 3 weeks long. So typically teachers are within the same unit, which is working within the same cluster of standards. So there is some transfer that they can do even if they're not within the same week of instruction.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just know from my experience teaching online that recreating all of the resources is what's taking so much time and such a drain. So if there was some way that, you know, say I'm a week ahead, then I can provide that resource to teachers who aren't quite there yet to help save some time. I think that would be great.
Absolutely. Right. And we can look into more ways to incorporate that and get it more widespread within the district.
Right, and I can speak a little bit to that too. In the math program for K-5 at least, the Ready Classroom, so the vendor is actually doing that. They're trying to keep ahead of the teachers as best they can. And so they are working on K-5 right now, and they have put some asynchronous lessons, so they have gone and done that work for the teachers, and there is a library that they can access those. I do know also one of our middle school teachers in our district collaborative team meetings recently, she is very much into Nearpod, and she has offered to put hers in a folder for her middle school teammates and colleagues to access. So we do have some of those teachers out there, and we're hoping to get more. I know our technology and integration specialist has done a lot of training on Nearpod, and it is a big excitement right now with a lot of teachers. So I think it'll just, it'll increase as we go along. Also in iReady, there are digital lessons. They're not by a human, they're by little critters, little cute critters, and they're interactive. And so if teachers are in a bind, they could always assign that lesson as well.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
I will add, Ms. Almay, that you know as well as we do that pacing is a challenge in the distance learning environment. So we are behind where we should be. It is a concern.
If there's no more questions on this slide, we can go ahead to the next one. And did we skip one? Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, nope. Back one.
Do you want ELA or math first? Math, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I thought that was slide 14. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is just a little snapshot here of our distance learning plan that was submitted to the state in terms of math. And then you just saw a sneak peek of the ELA one. Will come after that. So I can go over a quick overview of the different categories that you're looking at here. So the first light blue column is the instructional delivery methods that are happening right now in our digital COVID world. All the teachers in the district have set up a Google Classroom. And I'm sure most of you guys know that's a web-based platform where teachers can put links on there, assign lessons or assign activities, put a form on there where students can submit their work. Of course, we're going to have that in conjunction with Zoom. So we'll have that live interaction between the class and the teacher. And then also iReady would apply here in math, because we do have that digital component where the students can get on, do the interactive tutorials, do interactive practice, there's learning games, they can do online assessments as well. Moving on to the next column, kind of already stated that our content provider is Ready Classroom Mathematics K-8, along with the iReady digital component. And the next column there is formative assessments, typical formative assessments. So formative assessment is a smaller assessment. Usually it's over a smaller amount of content, fewer standards, and it is used to inform our instruction. So teachers would take the data from a quick little check for understanding and monitor and adjust for the next day or for later that day. Some examples that we're using in math would be an exit ticket. So that's, a couple of problems at the end of class, kind of uses an exit to be able to leave class that day. And then there's obviously weekly quizzes that are available for teachers. We have the math program has those in Word form, so they can be edited. There's in PDF form, and they're also in digital form. And then, of course, those online digital lessons, there are reports that the teachers can look at too to inform their instruction going forward. And moving on to the last column is the summative assessments. So summative assessments are typically going to cover more content, a bigger chunk of standards, maybe a month or more of material. And those, of course, are going to still inform instruction, just like all the examples in the previous column. So teachers are, again, going to use that data to figure out what kids still need, if they've got something, if we need to revisit something moving forward. So some examples of those would be the unit assessment or like a chapter test at the end of a math unit, which could last between 3 to 5 weeks, depending on the topic. And then, of course, there's our iReady diagnostic assessment, which is our big one, which we administer 3 times a year. We're really excited to get that growth data. We're hoping to see that. The students are actually in the process of taking their second diagnostic assessment before the end of the calendar year. All right, and so then,
I'm sorry, Ms. Carter. I have a question on, this is Dr. Diaz. I have a question on the summative assessment column. Are these just examples? Because it looks like, based on the other slides, this is missing a few of the summative, like Galileo and then the AZ merit.
Right, so this one was mostly focused around the resource. But yeah, the math, the Ready Classroom resources. But yes, of course, we're definitely still doing Galileo and obviously AZ merit for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
This is Susan Benjamin. I have a question in terms of intervention. So, you do a formative assessment on a regular basis. They're frequent. So some children are having difficulties. Before you get to the summative assessment, what's happening? It's like, I feel like there needs to be another column in there for intervention. And I know intervention can be a myriad of different things. And so you can't write them all down because it's individualized, but how's that working?
So what I would imagine and hope to see in a classroom is that if a teacher does see that there is a student or a group of students who are struggling and that are not ready to move on to the next content or the next standard, is that the teacher it would be more of, in my opinion, an instructional strategy there, to pull them into a small group, do some one-on-one, possibly assign them a below grade level digital assignment as a prerequisite. A lot of this can be done proactively with iReady because before a unit, the teacher does have a report on, according to the diagnostic, on where the teacher can see groups of kids, names, specific names on, according to the diagnostic, who maybe isn't ready for this unit. And so the teacher can proactively front load that group of students with some material for the skills that they may be missing. So yeah, there isn't a perfect answer on what to do because the teacher is going to have to kind of individualize that depending on the content and the student, how big the group of students is. If it's just one student, if it's the whole class, then of course we need to look in the mirror and kind of start over a little bit with that material.
So when your professional learning communities meet, is there opportunity for teachers to kind of flex and, you know, you've got a group of kids that kind of fall into the same category and have the same issue, and they move to a different teacher, and so there's some flexible work and all of that?
I have not seen them move to a different teacher. Dr. Brown, have you seen any of that so far?
If I could step in, Dr. Brown.
Yeah.
I would say that that happens at some schools, Ms.
Okay.
Benjamin, but it does not occur consistently across the district. And it occurs at some grade levels more effectively than other grade levels.
Well, my experience is that if you flex and allow, some teachers are better at certain things, and so you allow those things to happen, you have better outcomes. So just an idea.
Absolutely. That, I would love to see that extended if we can find that success for sure. All right, Ashley, did you want to take over for language arts?
I would love to, as long as there are no more math questions.
No, there's no more.
All right, thank you so much. So looking through the same lens, but with the ELA focus. So we're looking at the distance learning plan for English language arts. You can see the educational delivery methods are still going to be via Google Classroom and Zoom, which we know every teacher in the district does have that Google Classroom set up in conjunction with their Zoom classroom. The content that's being provided for K-6 will be delivered via Benchmark Advance, and Benchmark Universe is the online platform that it comes through. So the content, Benchmark Advance, the online platform, Benchmark Universe. When we look at 7th and 8th grade, that's where we are going to see the McGraw-Hill StudySync, and this is delivered online as well in its very own StudySync platform. As we're looking at the formative assessments, there's really a range here depending on the grade level that's being serviced. So if we're looking at kindergarten, we do have anecdotal notes that can be taken from small group guided reading, from small group instruction, even from intervention. There are ways to collect information. Benchmark Advance also does offer an end of week assessment. So each unit within that resource is 3 weeks long. And at the end of week 1 and week 2, there is the opportunity to assess. It's a bit of a shorter assessment that's meant to be used to drive instruction. So that does exist in grades K through 6. Once we get to grade 7 and 8 and we switch to our StudySync resource, within those resources, teachers do have the ability to do some reading quizzes as well as some vocabulary development within each lesson of StudySync. So lots of opportunities for teachers to monitor student progress as we're moving within our units in our written curriculum and within our board adopted resources. As we look at the summative assessments within Benchmark Advance for K-6, you will find that every unit within Benchmark Advance does have an end of unit assessment. So we have a formative assessment at the end of week 1 and week 2, and then we have a much larger end of unit assessment that's really going to cover all of those cluster of skills that were introduced within the entire unit. We're getting a capture of that at the end of unit assessment. Starting in 2nd grade, there are performance tasks 3 times per year, and these are opportunities for students to practice what is closely mirroring your AZM2 or your Galileo writing opportunities. So students are seeing what this looks like before they are going to an AZ Merit setting or an AZM2 setting. So we do have those performance tasks. Within 7th and 8th grade StudySync, there is the end of unit assessment. That's happening approximately every 7 weeks, as our units within StudySync are about 6 weeks long. And then in addition to that, there are extended writing projects for 7th and 8th grade as well, with opportunities to practice their essay writing and those skills that they have developed within their writing resources.
Miss Zek, is it Zek?
Yes, Zek. It looks like Zetch, but it's Zek.
Okay, it's Zek. This is Dr. Diaz speaking. Just quick clarification. So are these end of unit assessments mandatory or is it optional for the teacher?
We are using the end of unit assessments as our common assessments for the year. So when you're looking at the pacing calendar that we've sent out to teachers, it's laying out the unit of benchmark as well as that end of unit assessment. And we're calling that our common assessment. So every teacher is giving it. And that's the data that we are using to drive our conversations within our collaborative team meetings.
Okay, so these are referred to as the CFAs on the table where we get into formative assessment.
Yes, we've been calling them our common assessments because we do realize that some of them are a little bit larger than what you would traditionally know as a formative assessment. But I think our bottom line here is we do have teachers who are administering the same assessment that we can use in either a formative or a summative way to help drive our instruction.
Okay. Thank
And I
you.
do understand that might cause some confusion. This template was provided from ADE. So this is our distance learning plan, and we had to provide this information. So as far as ADE is concerned, and as far as this distance learning plan is concerned, our end of unit assessments are considered summative, but I understand what your question is, Dr. Diaz, that is somewhat confusing. And I just wanted to insert that, of course, Ms. Benjamin, here's where our teachers do walk to read with the 95% group materials for K3. So that intervention, there could be another column here for ELA for sure, across all of our schools except for Faith North and Shaw. And then Emerson is K8, 95% group, and I believe Bethune also, but I need to check on Bethune.
Well, thank you, because Walk to Read is great, and it makes a huge difference in kids' lives and how quickly they learn. I have a question for Mrs. Elvis about Ames Web Plus, and how are you using that? And I spoke about this, maybe not the last meeting, but the meeting before, in terms of, I look at special education as a place for intervention and to move the kids out, to set goals and move them out, give them the skills they need and send them back to the mainstream, send them back to regular ed. And I used Ames Web as a way with the MTSS process to send back a good percentage of my children in special ed in reading. What kind of things are you setting up? Because I know you're new, but what kinds of things are you thinking of setting up to make that happen for the children in Phoenix Elementary?
So Ames Web is one of the measurements that is used for our students to measure their achievement. And so all of our students with IEPs are also being measured in all of the same ELA and math benchmark measurements as their general education peers. The only students that would be an exception are less than 1% students that qualify for the alternate assessment. And so we use different measurements for them, but they are all being measured using the same tools as their peers for academic growth and to compare to how close they are to closing that achievement gap.
So are you setting trend lines and having your special ed team meet monthly or every 2 weeks in order to look to see whether the children are, so you can change intervention when they're not?
So that's something that we can look into further. Our students with disabilities are also participating in 95% group Walk to Read and those type of things exactly for that purpose, to close that gap and to monitor those trend lines and make adjustments as needed. So they're already participating in some of those things, and their IEP goal measurement is just one of those.
Well, I do hope in the future, after you're here in the district for a while, that you set up teams to look at that data regularly, because as we know, children respond to intervention differently. And sometimes they need it more often, sometimes they need it at a different time of day, and sometimes they need to wear their glasses. Yeah. And those are really important things. And sometimes they're simple and you just go, geez, I can't believe we missed that. And so I hope that, you're looking at those children specifically in terms of what their needs are, and then the intensity and the time of day and the other issues that are related to their special needs.
Absolutely. I appreciate you bringing that up. We are supporting that, and as well as working hand in hand in the MTSS process, because as we know, students with disabilities that receive special education services also are in need of multi-tiered systems of support. So just as soon as they partake in a program such as an MTSS intervention, they continue to need that on top of the special education services to help close that gap. Special education isn't the end-all answer. It's just one of the interventions.
Well, my last comment is I hope you set some goals for your children, and I hope you move them out of special education. And I was able to, in some schools that were high need, low SES, not in mathematics, I hadn't gotten that far, but in LEA, reduced the number by like 60% of the children. So I think what was going on is they really hadn't had adequate instruction to start with, and that's nobody's fault. It's just what happened. And but we were able to provide that, and so those children were able to move back into a regular environment and thrive. And so I hope that you're able to do that too.
Yes, thank you. And our CNI coordinators that have been presenting today have been very inclusive of our special educators and making sure that they're receiving the same professional development, so they also can be content experts and help with strategies and collaboration and also curriculum implementation to achieve that gap push.
That's good. That's an expertise I never had, so that's great. Thanks.
All right, so I think that was the conclusion of this portion related to the academics and professional development components and our curriculum management plan. And I just wanted to open it up to additional questions if those haven't been answered, and to also just say that word systems again, because I hope you're seeing how those are starting to take shape. It's going to be a while before it's automatic, but the partnership with Alicia Zelvis and with the content specialists and coordinators, we're really starting to function as a unit where nothing is a silo. Everything is now becoming much more interconnected. So I'll pause for questions.
I will have some questions related to benchmark advance and let me see here, and Ames Web Plus, but I'll save those for the formative assessment PowerPoint, because I'm just right now I'm trying to understand what the difference is between the tests.
Okay, and I'm sure Ashley will speak to any of that once we get through the next piece. I'm going to make you an expert on all things literacy, Ashley, even though she'll be way too humble to say so. So then I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. McLaughlin, for a couple of more points before we jump right into all of the assessment.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Are you going to forward to the next slide? Thank you. There we go. Okay, as I stated at the beginning, there are 12 recommendations in our CNI, in our curriculum audit, and we are focusing on 4 that have to do with assessment. And recommendation 6 is about developing that expectation, that mindset that we use data to guide all of our decisions. We also have an expectation, or within this recommendation, is about program evaluation. We started developing that mindset about data-driven decision-making at district-wide professional development in August of 2019. That was the first time we focused on the collaborative inquiry cycle, and that collaborative inquiry cycle was continued. That PD was continued in our district CTMs, and I know Dr. Elshire will talk later about how that collaborative inquiry cycle, those 4 PLC questions are asked in our district collaborative team meetings. The next recommendation and the last recommendation that we are focused on is recommendation 11. And again, this is about the comprehensive, it calls for the development of comprehensive assessment procedures to ensure that we're gathering reliable data and we are making decisions using that data at all levels. That means that our teachers are using that data in the classroom to make decisions about instruction, that our schools are making data-driven decisions about programs at the school level, and as the district, we are also making decisions that are based in student assessment data. And this is the one, I'm sorry, that talks about program evaluation, not the last one. And we will come to the board with more information in the spring about program evaluation and how we do that. So Dr. Brown, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Dr. McLaughlin. So next up, we'll talk about our formal student assessment plan. And as I mentioned a little earlier, Brant Lloyd, our coordinator of assessment, had to be out for personal reasons, but because of the depth and wealth of knowledge we have on our team, plus how interconnected so many pieces are, Dr. Ailshire is able to step in and help shed some light on all of this, because assessment is very closely tied to student success. And so our coordinator of student success and assessment both spend quite a bit of time together looking at data and figuring out what next steps we can take and what systems we can put in place. So Dr. Ailshire, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Thank you for the introductions. Good evening, Dr. Diaz, Governing Board President, Superintendent Dr. Weeks, Governing Board members, future Governing Board members, and to all of my colleagues out there. I want to thank you all for all of the incredible questions that you've been asking throughout the night, and I am deeply humbled to be representing Mr. Brant Lloyd on this particular segment of the presentation, and I want to make sure I do him justice. So I am notorious for going off script, but I'm going to do my best to. So if you see me kind of reading a little bit, I apologize, but I want to make sure I encapsulate his brilliance. And he has definitely made sure that he has some very detailed aspects of this that I want to make sure I hit. That being said, I wanted to sort of start by talking about, systems, quite frankly. That has been a part that we've been hearing throughout this whole presentation. And when we really think about our student assessment plan, it is a system, right? Because the assessed, the taught, and the learning all are intertwined with one another. They are all mutually supportive of one another. And so my fantastic colleagues, Ashley and Lisa, as well as Amanda and Susan, they really, really did a wonderful job of explaining a lot of the aspects of how these different aspects of the curriculum, teaching, and assessment are all intertwined. But these are all critical components that are mutually reliant upon each other. And as we go through this, you've already probably sensed that as we've been going through this presentation, and that will certainly be a central theme as we do this latter section of the presentation itself. So first of all, you cannot have, as I believe Ms. Benjamin pointed out, you cannot have sort of a taught curriculum unless you have it assessed. And so that you want to make sure you have all of these aspects being mutually beneficial and supportive of one another. It should also be said that just as important, the assessment plan also works to make sure that we as a district are in line with state and federal guidance orders. Everything from Governor Ducey's executive orders, move on when ready, accountability and federal requirements. That is, of course, the world that we live in. And they certainly have a place in the work that we do. So we're working in the assessment world to kind of balance these two mutually supportive and not necessarily diametrically opposed ways in which assessment systems are kind of brought into alignment with one another. So with that being said, I'm going to talk about a couple of different ones that, again, I'm pretty sure I could not do it better than my colleagues Ashley and Lisa talked about in regards to the formative versus summative assessments. And Governing Board President Dr. Diaz, I hope to hopefully give a little bit more light as you're talking about sort of the formative and summative, because it's a quandary that I've been teaching for 18 years in education, 18 years, and it's always an issue to sort of talk about the difference of these two, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But as my colleagues discussed, formative assessment is really not about the evaluation. It is to inform teaching, right? So it is an assessment for learning. We use this type of assessment to take a snapshot of where students actually are in their learning and make sure that we are then adapting our instruction to meet their needs where they are currently at, right? So the difference between a formative and summative oftentimes can be boiled down to the simple fact of what are you doing with the data? In the case of formative assessment, what you are doing is you are adapting your instruction to ensure that students are reaching mastery. And so you're using these wide varieties of formative assessments to really inform your instruction before you get to the point in which, one has to move on, right, in their teaching. So you really want to have these snapshots of formative. It's really the bread and butter of what good teaching is, because it is both the complex and large scale systems of like Galileo and some of the other programs we'll talk about in a second, but it's also about these smaller, everyday, great teaching things that our teachers do just to kind of get that dipstick of where students are in their own individual learning. But again, the whole point of formative assessments, as we define them, are to really guide the learning and to ensure that we can then adapt our instruction before we get to those sort of end of unit assessments and then set our students up so that they are successful when we get to that point, rather than setting them up to fail, so to speak. It is also critically important, as I want to say, because I am technically, my role is for MTSS and PBIS and then lots of other things. So I cannot emphasize enough the role that these formative assessments play in our intervention systems. These are the systems that we use to really define whether we are going to dig deeper, whether they're going to be pulling small group, whether we're providing enrichment for some groups. That is really the role of some of these formative assessments, is to really reach that intervention phase to accurately address the needs of our students. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the formative assessments that we have in our district, I believe on the next slide. All right, so here we go. So here is just a ton of information. So I won't necessarily go through all of this, but what it does do is it, in a remarkable way, shows the depth of assessments that we have in our district. As I listened to a lot of the presentations leading up to this point, I am the new guy on the block. I've only been in our district for 4 months, and to truly hear the incredible work our colleagues have been doing to create in this very, very short window of time is truly inspiring. I am from a district that is exponentially larger, and it took years and years to put things like these assessment systems and these curriculum systems in place. And whereas in our district, it's been put together in just an incredibly short period of time. So I want to applaud all of my colleagues who have been so instrumental in that process. But one of the most hardest pieces are putting into these various aspects, these assessment systems, right? So Galileo, that is actually a formative assessment tool, because the purpose of the Galileo assessment really is to provide us with some benchmark data of what's going well in the instruction, and to ensure that by the time the students get to that summative assessment, which is technically the AZ Merit 2, we have addressed any possible misconceptions or challenges or deficits that the children might have as a result. So Galileo really is that form of formative assessment. It also has the extra benefit of replicating many of the parameters of AZM2. So it really helps to acclimate our students to what the questions and the rigor and the format of those final summative assessments mandated by the state are going to look like. But we use it as use Galileo as that form of assessment to really understand where students are at in their learning before we get to the AZM2 and those other assessments, where it might be too late to really make the changes that we need to inform our instruction and to help our students get to mastery. And then same thing for Ames Webs Plus for the reading benchmarks, except those are for our most precious little students who we know K3, it is do or die in order to ensure that they are reading at grade level. And so we really need to make sure that we have a proper assessment tool to really make sure that when we are talking about our K3, we are meeting them exactly where they're at and providing immediate interventions to what they need at that moment. Because if we can get them at K3 and we can hold on to them and we can really see that year-to-year growth, we set them up for success in the future years. And I don't need to tell anyone on this particular call the incredible research and importance of K3 literacy and how it sets students up for success really up into college and beyond. So that is something that we take very seriously as in our district, and making sure that we've got that on there. We'll go for the next slide. A couple of other formative assessments, because we've got quite a few. The iReady, which Lisa talked in great deal about. that is a math diagnostic. Again, I want to applaud our district because there aren't that many districts that have a lot of math diagnostics. It is something that is woefully inadequate in many of our sister districts. We tend to focus a lot on literacy and literacy formative assessments, not so much on the math. And so the fact that we have that in place and that we are doing that important work is a real benefit to our students, our teachers. I know how much they appreciate it, and it's just critically important. Near and dear to my heart was the common formative assessments outlined a little bit by Ashley. I have been labeled on this particular call a couple of times as a leader of CFAs. I really want to make sure I give credit where credit is due, and that is to our content specialists, without whose support, help, and expertise, I would have crashed into the mountain and set the whole thing on fire a long time ago. So I could not be more thankful to have such a wonderful team. I meet with them before I meet with the larger CFA group to make sure that I am aligned with the district pacing guides and calendars. I take their suggestions, their expertise, and they truly actually are the heart of the work of the CFAs. So I want to make sure I give credit where credit's due in terms of their valuable work behind the scenes, because they are unsung heroes as far as that goes. The other unsung heroes of that, of course, are our teachers themselves. The CFAs, when we talk about the CFAs in the DCTMs, the DC, and I'm throwing around a lot of acronyms, which is our district collaborative team meetings, and I had to learn that one too. So our district collaborative team meetings, in which the CFAs, which are the common formative assessments, are a high priority. The facilitators that are part of that team are really teachers in our district that we're building capacity with. And so a lot of the leadership and a lot of the work that's going into those not only comes from our content specialists, but from our teacher ourselves. And that's a really powerful statement to our district. And it has been probably the highlight of my experience so far in our district, to be working alongside them as they have been working really hard, considering the situation that we are currently in, to really implement the 4 critical questions of professional learning communities, which is, what is it that we want students to know? And that's hugely important to where our content specialists step in. How will we know that they have learned it? And that is essentially the assessment world that we are talking about right now. What do we do when they haven't? And that is interventions and MTSS and all of the wonderful systems that we're working to put into place for that. And then always the trickiest of the questions, actually, as it turns out, is what do we do when they have mastered it? And where can we provide that enrichment? So that is where the CFAs really fall in, utilizing the district approved resources as far as that goes. And then I could go on, because formative assessments really is a huge bag of resources. And I won't, because Dr. Brown has gone to the next slide. God bless her. So summative assessments, that is really where we're looking at the, and summative assessments are tough, because summative assessments can, depending on what you are doing with it, necessarily, if you're using it to inform instructions, there's not necessarily the end all be all. But for the clear-cut definition, summative assessments are evaluative, and they provide students' current status in comparison to a standard or other students' performance. So this is really those assessments at the very end where we're looking at, have they actually now mastered the standard? Where do they fall in relation to their peers? They are often a component of state, federal, and local accountability measures. But the data it's more than just assigning that to external actors, right? Because that invalidates their utility and motivation for them. Our work as educators is critically based on the work of these summative assessments and the information that they provide for us. We talked a little bit earlier in the presentation about being able to use assessment to determine program goals and determine program efficacy. Summative assessments are incredibly valuable to us, both as a department and as individual practitioners, to determine, are we doing the right work? And if so, fantastic, let's take that time to celebrate. But if not, where are the weaknesses within the system that we can kind of more accurately diagnose and look at? But you've got to have that summative assessment to do it.
Dr. Alshire, if I could just make a correction to that slide, Dr. Brown, if you could go back. So this should say assessments of learning.
Yes.
So summative assessments are assessments of learning, where formative assessments are assessments for learning. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And I think it's a really important part, right? Because we, even experienced educators, get those terms sometimes a little blurred in terms of what is the outcome for a formative assessment versus what is the outcome supposed to be of summative. So I appreciate, it's a really great saying that really kind of helps delineate the outcomes of those two different tools. So here are the summative assessments that kind of dictate some of the work that we are doing. It is really the foundation when we look at the work that my colleagues in the content specialists were talking about. You know, when we're developing these pacing calendars, when we're developing this written curriculum, we are looking with an end in mind of what are these summative assessments that the state and other accountability measures are placing on us to make sure that we're getting our students ready for that point, right, to that level of mastery. So of course, we all know what these ones are, right? So this is the AZM2, formerly known as just Arizona Merit, but now it had a sibling, I guess, and now it's 2. And that is really there to measure student proficiency on grade level standards and inform decision making by the district. It is a hugely valuable tool to us at a district level. But again, it cannot, you know, this is data at the beginning of the year that every teacher looks at, right? They look at the kids that are coming to them and they're looking at what are the skills that they're coming with, what is that, and how can I adapt my instruction in order to meet them where they are. So again, that's why there is always this confusion, because depending on what you do with the assessment, it can do different things, right? It doesn't necessarily, I oftentimes challenged my teachers when I was working with them on this type of stuff of do not subjugate yourself to the dichotomy of or, right? It doesn't have to be this or that. It can facilitate different outcomes and different utilities depending on what you're doing with it. And I think that's oftentimes the confusion that we have when we're talking about summative versus formative. It's really not necessarily so much the test, it is what is the power of the test? What are we going to do with that tool? The AZ Science, that is the science assessment that kind of comes with it. And then there's, of course, the alternative assessment. This was what our director of exceptional education was talking about just a moment ago. These are students that assessments for students with modified proficiency levels. And we'll move on to the next slide because it talks a little bit more about those as well. Right. So the MSAA and ELA in mathematics, again, these are summative assessments for students that do not necessarily need to be taking the AZM2 where it'd be inappropriate for them to do so. And again, a formal assessment near and dear to my heart coming from Tucson is the AZELA. This is the assessment that we utilize to let us know how we are doing with our bilingual or second. We always called them bilingual in Tucson because it's a gift of what they have. But we also call them English language learners. They are individuals that are learning English, and the AZELA is there to determine their proficiency in that as they are becoming multilingual. And then and see, now I've left script completely. Brant is going to have my head, so I don't even know where I'm at anymore. But what slide am I on, Dr. Brown? Am I on 23?
You're on 24.
I am. Good for me. Yeah. I'm on 24. Sorry, Brant. Love you. So in addition to state tests, we administer the Galileo pre and post assessments as summative measures to evaluate students' growth over a year and their proficiency on state standards. And it should also be, of course, noted, and it's no surprise to anyone on this particular call, that federal and state funds are awarded on these summative assessment results. So hence their incredible importance to us as both tools to shape our instruction, tools to shape our curriculum, and tools to shape our teaching. And then moving on. So this is a calendar that provides an at-a-glance view of some summative and formative assessments that we have throughout the year. We have all of these scheduled as part of federal and state mandates, except for the iReady diagnostic. And we are working to provide flexibility and limiting additional testing in every way possible, while also working to make sure that we collect reliable data. We are all highly, highly cognizant of over-testing and testing burnout. But at the same time, they have a place, you know, going back to that structure, to that model. You cannot have a written curriculum. You cannot have a taught curriculum unless you have the assessed one. So we really want to make sure we have the right assessments in there, assessments that are not assessments just for their own sake, but ones that really help us to evaluate program efficiency, program effectiveness, validity, and as well as shape our planning, shape our interventions, and shape our enrichment. So there, right there in front of you at a glance is all of the different forms of assessment. And I learned from Brant, because every time I talked to Mr. Lloyd, I learned something new. So I want to brag about knowledge, which is CBAS. Right there under the Galileo, it stands for Comprehensive Benchmark Assessment Series. You can ask Brant these types of questions, and you will get this opportunity about these various acronyms, and he will answer them with eerie efficiency, and it's quite wonderful to behold. And you're stuck with me, so I apologize. But we'll move on to the next one. Last but not least, this kind of gives everyone an idea of the different assessments that we use within our individual schools, right? So this kind of gives you an idea of what schools are using which assessments. As you can see, Galileo is definitely one of the assessments that is held in common. It's something that almost all of our sites are doing, depending on what grade levels. But then you also can see alternative data that is being collected by certain schools, such as iReady Diagnostics, and unit diagnostics as well, or curricular resources. So this kind of gives you a sense of the different fall data sources that were being collected by each one of our sites that our incredible administrators are now diligently working with their teachers to sort of really dig deeper into in order to make those interventions and enrichment and changes in the instruction that will set our students up for the summative assessments in the spring.
Ooh, thank you, Dr. Ailshire.
You are very welcome.
I'm really proud of the job that you did. And before we open it up to questions about the assessment portion or other questions that you have, I do want to end the assessment portion by echoing some of what Dr. Ailshire said about let's not fall into the either or category if we don't have to. I just from personal experience, to be fully transparent, was the most anti-assessment person you were ever going to meet, starting in high school all the way through grad school. They can't take the degree back right now. So I'm going to say I found a way to game the system to get into the grad school that I wanted without taking the GRE, because I made it a personal mission because I was so anti-testing. And it took years for me to have that change of mind and it took a while for me to come around to accepting my issue wasn't with assessment. My issue was with, why are we assessing? Are we using it for the purposes it was intended to be used for? Are we measuring the right things? And then once we have that information, are we using it to do something? And so my team's challenge in trying to create systems that align to the written and taught curriculum is to really think about assessment from the lens of, once we have this information, what are we going to do with it that's going to make things better for students? And so from my perspective, I would love to change the narrative around assessment nationwide, but beginning with our district. And instead of focusing as much on whether or not we are over-assessing, instead focusing on how can we make the assessments that we're required to give useful tools for our teachers and for our students. So that's our biggest challenge is we have to do it anyway. How do we make it meaningful so that it's not one more thing and instead is part of our entire alignment system and process? So with that said, systems, alignment, wow, crazy amounts of work happening in a year and a half. I could not be even an ounce prouder of the work the team is doing. And I'm sure that you have even more questions after hearing all of this about assessment. And I have complete confidence that my team is ready to address any questions or concerns you have. And if not, we'll get back to you with an answer, but we'll stop talking.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, and thank you to everyone who presented today. This was a wealth of information, and it was just, it really helped me to understand the breadth of what we're doing. So thank you again. I do have several questions, but I want to open it up to my board colleagues to see if they'd like to go first. Are there any questions or comments at this time?
This is Susan Benjamin. I don't have any comments. I'm rarely speechless, but I'm pretty speechless because Yeah, I looked at this presentation before, and thank you, Dr. Brown, for sending it out ahead of time. And the whole thing gives me hope. And I love the systems. Systems make things happen. You know how the system works and you use the system. And everybody knows how to get into it and how to get out of it. And I want to thank Dr. McLaughlin because this gives me hope. And I have hope for all the children in Phoenix Elementary. And I appreciate all the work. Is an extensive description of what you're doing and how far you've come in such a short time. So thank you for all of your work and for your team. It's been, I'm a little overwhelmed with all the great work that you're doing. So thank you.
I appreciate that compliment, Ms. Benjamin. We work hard to make sure that we are providing support to our teachers and our school leaders, making me emotional, so that they can do the best for our kids. So we truly take our purpose seriously. We are here solely to serve and support our schools so that our kids benefit and that we close that achievement gap so that our kids have the best future that they can possibly have. So thank you.
This is what it's all about. This is what Phoenix Elementary is all about, that. And as Dr. Brown said, you know, everything's interconnected. And that's why I went on and on about the finance part, because you can't do it if things aren't working well, and they all have to be interconnected. And no one lives in a silo. And it's looked like you're breaking them down really nicely. And the systems work is you all to be applauded for. I'm impressed. So thank you.
This is Naomi. I also don't really have questions. It's pretty clear to me. And I know that it's difficult for students and for families to have students often being assessed, but I also know how valuable that feedback is for teachers to make sure that they're providing the best instruction for students. So I appreciate all the information as well. And I don't have questions. I thought it was pretty clear. Thank you.
All right, well, I guess I'm the only one that has questions right now. And it's just more to understand some of the context of the different assessments. And I'll start with Galileo. So I understand that we're using Galileo because it is attached to our TIF funding and the grant there. I'm having a hard time understanding whether or not our assessments like iReady and Ames Web Plus could take the place of Galileo once our grant is over, since they, in a sense, do have summative assessments.
So I think that's a great question, Dr. Diaz, and one that my team has also been tossing around. So if it's okay, I don't want to fully commit to an answer other than to say that it's an option we're exploring. Lisa and Brant and Ashley and I are looking into what are other districts using. We know that some districts do use iReady for different purposes other than just the diagnostic. So if it's okay, I'll leave it at, we're completely open to exploring whether Galileo is still the best fit or if there are other assessments that we might already be giving that could serve the same purpose and potentially eliminate one in the future.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I mean, I definitely understand the need for data. I'm a data person, but I want to make sure that if one of the assessments we're using could supplant Galileo, you know, we could go that route. So we're just limiting the types of tests. So I appreciate that your team is looking forward to that. Do you have an anticipated date by when you might have an answer or when we could circle back on that?
Early spring.
Early spring.
Because the legwork is already happening as far as reaching out to find out what we already have, how that's being used other places. So I think by early spring, we should at least be able to revisit the conversation with more information for you.
Okay. And this question, it might not be, if we decide not to use Galileo, it's not going to be as relevant, but I suppose it could be with the other forms of assessments. I'm not familiar with any of them other than Galileo because I used that when I was a teacher. And I can say there's a stark difference between the way you guys have everything set up, the systems in place and the support you have in place versus what I had in place. And man, I wish I was teaching in PSD during my first few years. It would have probably made things a lot smoother. But with that being said, when I had Galileo, I had no idea how to even extract the data. So our teachers trained on how to, number one, access their data and how to leverage their data. And if they're not, are you thinking through a system to ensure that teachers are able to do so they can use that to inform instruction?
So I'll answer that a couple of ways. I do know that prior to my arrival, Galileo's been around for a while, and I know that throughout the years there have been opportunities where the assessment director was able to work with schools on how to pull data and how to make use of that. So depending on when teachers were in the district, there may have been opportunities that I was not part of. With that said, even as recently as this year, Brant has been good about making sure that he's creating whatever sort of tutorials schools need in order to know what to pull, how to pull it, what the data means. And then most importantly, the work that Dr. Ailshire is also doing with our DCTMs is all, is also focused on where do we pull the data from? How can we use that information? And so it's not necessarily that there's a formal all teachers must come to Galileo one-on-one style training, but there are multiple opportunities so that those schools who are using it to create their own common formative assessments just that are shared across teams know how to reach in and pull it, that sort of thing. So I would say there are pockets of knowledge and wealth throughout the district, but there's not a mandatory everyone must learn to use this. With that said, if we do choose to move forward with Galileo or if it's something else, either way, I do think that as we move forward, building up that knowledge and that collective understanding of where to get the data from and what to do with the data once you get it is the direction that we're headed. So whether it's through Galileo, iReady, or any other map, whatever the magical assessment is, a focus as part of our comprehensive system will be, if you're new to PESD, do you know the basics of how to access whatever our must-dos are, and really building that into a robust system.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I really like the idea of having and you kind of mentioned it, your team mentioned it earlier on in the PowerPoint, having asynchronous type professional development where video tutorials on different ways to utilize and leverage and access Galileo, whatever assessment that might be. And as a teacher, if I attended a PD on it and I still needed a refresher, I could go to that hub, click on it, and have that at my fingertips. So I really like that idea of making that more available.
Thank you. And teachers, if you happen to be listening, bookmark the CNI website if you haven't, because that's available under the PD tab.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to make sure that all teachers are aware of that resource. That's incredible. Let's see here. My other question I have was, so in hearing about AIMSweb Plus and then Benchmark Advance, I'm still a little unclear of what differentiates them in terms of the assessment purposes and why one can't replace the other.
Okay, Ashley, do you want to chime in on that one?
Yes, I can. So Benchmark Advance is going to give us all of our core content. So that's giving us our reading comprehension, whether it's in literature or informational text. It is giving us our writing instruction. It's giving us our phonics as well. So the assessments within Benchmark Advance are going to assess all of that information in one of their assessments. So when we look at our weekly assessments, those are like 10 questions for the content that was covered in that specific week. When we look at our week 2 assessment, it's going to be a little bit longer for students, maybe about 15 questions, and it's covering all of the content within that week of instruction. And as we build our way up to the end of unit assessment within Benchmark, that's covering all content throughout the entire unit. So it's not just the phonics or the reading fluency side of it, which an Ames Web Plus might do. It's assessing all of the comprehension levels, all of the domains. Now, when we look at an Ames Web Plus, that's where we're looking deep into the phonics and the foundational skills. We're looking at how students are segmenting words or the letter names, letter sounds, stuff like that, looking at the oral reading fluency. So the assessments within Benchmark are not giving us that oral reading fluency piece or the letter sound piece. We do have phonics instruction there, but most of the Benchmark assessments are going to be within that comprehension with some ties to the foundational skills that were taught. But really they're assessing different things with a little bit of overlap.
Okay, that makes sense.
Dr. Diaz, if I could add, our Ames Web Plus is required by the Move On When Reading legislation. We have to have a literacy benchmark. It doesn't have to be Ames Web Plus, but that is what our district chose. Some districts use DIBELS. Ames Web Plus and DIBELS are the most often used by districts for the MAU purposes. Move On When Reading.
And does Galileo test the same areas that Ames Web Plus would test?
I would say, and Ashley, you can correct me, I would say that Ames Web Plus, Galileo is connected to the standards, which is that bigger picture, that broader picture, and Ames Web Plus assesses the skills that will help our children master those big standards.
Okay.
If I could add on to that, if we're looking at Galileo, the benchmark assessments, and Ames Web Plus, the two that are most closely related would be the Galileo and the benchmark assessment, where we're looking at the standards. And then the outlier there would be the Ames Web Plus, where we're looking at those skills within those foundational concepts.
Okay. And are the, so when you take the Galileo, you're able to compare data across the districts because it's all standard and you take it at the same time. With your benchmark advance, are you able to do the same type of analysis? So is every second grade ELA teacher taking the same end of unit benchmark advanced test at the same time to where you can look at that data across the district, or is it just based on their pacing?
The expectation is that every second grade teacher is giving that end of unit assessment. Now, with the digital space that we are in, we are seeing that not everyone is giving it at the same time. So there is a little bit of fluctuation in when it is being given. However, what we have been finding is that we are able to use that assessment data when it is given at the next district collaborative team meeting. So since everyone is administering the assessment, we will talk about that data at some point. It just happens to be a little bit fresher for some than others.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in theory, as you guys are thinking about whether or not to replace Galileo, Benchmark Advance could potentially be a replacement for that content area.
It is going to give us some of the same information, yes. And there are reporting features within Benchmark that will break down some of the student scores and even group students to say, hey, teacher, maybe these 5 students would work well together in a small group, in an intervention or in an enrichment setting. So Benchmark does have the capability to do that at the teacher level. And then we could explore more at the district level and some of those capabilities in the future.
And Ashley, is it fair to say that Benchmark would not give us that predictive connection as far as how students would do on AZM2, that level of reporting is not available?
It would not give us the predictive capability, no. We could do that dissection and deep diving ourselves, but it is not going to give us that assessment, just projection, if you will.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be interested to hear your findings early spring and revisit this conversation on these different assessments. One last question on the Ames Web Plus. So I noticed that it does not test grade 5. Is there a specific reason for that? Or
Ames Web Plus is going to be K3.
okay, K3. I thought I saw, maybe I misread it. I thought it said K3 and then 6 through 8, but I must have misread that. Or, so I'm looking at page 20 on the PowerPoint. It says administered 3 times a year to all K3, 4 through 8. Oh, special education students. Okay. Never mind. I just answered my own question. Sorry about that.
Those are the best kind.
Let's see here. And then on the assessment calendar, is there a specific reason that we don't include benchmark advance? And I'm specifically looking at slide 25.
I think these are our formal or summative assessments that we are giving. I'm not sure this is where benchmark would fit in as we are choosing to give it. I think these are the ones that we are required to give.
Okay.
That is correct, Ashley. Yes.
iReady, where that's the only math diagnostic data that we would have available. Whereas for literacy, we have other more diagnostic focused assessments.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I have 2 more questions. So the next question is for slide 26. Why is there such variation between schools on which grades are tested and which assessments are used?
Dr. Diaz, this was the first year that we gave schools an option. Our 4 D schools, so Dunbar, Emerson, Kenilworth, and Herrera, do not have a choice. They must, per ADE, administer the Galileo 1st through 8th grade ELA and math 4 times per year. So the pre, 2 benchmarks, and then a post. We gave our other schools the option of eliminating one of those Galileo benchmarks or both of those Galileo benchmarks for grades 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. All of our schools have to administer the 2nd through 3rd grade ELA Galileo for our Move on when reading purposes requirements. So that's why you see some discrepancy between the schools. We gave them a choice this year.
And how do you, I don't know if it's too early to tell, but by giving choice, is there, I guess for me, when I see that there's choices, it would then like lend my thoughts to thinking, well, we probably don't need a Galileo then. If some schools aren't using it and the district is able to still understand where our students are at. So how do you view the choice and its impact on our ability to support our students at this point? Or is it too early to tell?
No, I think you bring up a very good point. So the pre-post Galileo is not a choice for anyone because that is connected to the real score. This will allow us to evaluate the Galileo as we're thinking about, do we continue with the Galileo next year? Do we not? So I think you bring up a very good point.
Okay. And then my last question that I have, and I know that systems are just being created, so this is something that you guys might be considering for the future, but ultimately the individuals most affected by this are the students and then the teachers who are implementing the assessments. So have you guys received feedback from the teachers on how valuable these assessments are to their teaching practices and the learning of their students? And so the intent behind this question is, I saw in several of the purposes that the intent was to inform teaching practices. But if we're finding that, say, 90% of teachers don't believe Galileo or benchmark advance, or I don't know, pick an assessment. If they don't believe that it actually is informing their teaching and it's just a test, then that would give us an opportunity to find a different resource or provide the support that they need to actually find it valuable. So do we have a system for feedback, or have we done that in the past?
So I'll say that this is where Dr. Ailshire is really helping us out with helping teachers to understand what a true data conversation could sound like. I think that right now in education in general, most of us have a bad taste in our mouths when it comes to assessment because we feel like we do it so often that sometimes the value does get lost. And so I would be reluctant to ask whether or not it is valuable rather than the question of what do you need in order to make it something that that impacts your teaching, only because it's one of those where, like and dislike is kind of when I'm picking an ice cream flavor. But if I know that I have to give this other assessment, is there a way to make it meaningful? And how do I get others to, like I said, I gamed the system to avoid taking a test. So I'm right there with the teachers as far as what am I doing with this information anyway? But the systems that Dr. Ailshire is putting in place with MTSS and district CTMs is what's going to hopefully allow us to change the conversation. And then once assessment in and of itself is no longer a dirty word, now we can talk about, now which of these assessments did you learn the most from? Which of these influenced your teaching the most? Why is that? And then when we understand their why, then we can better determine which ones are the best fit, rather than it sort of being right now. Right now, I think everyone is stressed. Everyone's feeling pulled in a lot of directions anyway. And then you put an iReady in front of teachers who are now having to adjust to distance learning, teaching online, and a new resource. And now we have this whole new test. And I think even the most optimistic of teachers would express some frustration. So I prefer to wait a little bit and let them just get used to the program and asking questions before we start getting into the value piece. Mm-hmm. With a Galileo, it's the opposite piece. It would be a different and interesting conversation. And I think before we gave any tool the boot, we would want to find out what's the value before we just, at the top level decided to chuck it. It's also an assessment that's tied to teachers' compensation. So the reviews might be mixed on how they feel about that as well. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a little too early for this team that just got together to make those decisions, but we are open to the conversations as part of our larger review.
That is totally fair, and I get that, definitely. I think you definitely make a great point. And I would not advocate for do you like this or not. Right. I think it's more of digging what I would be looking for, and perhaps this is something that you guys could present to us in the spring, is I'm interested to know how often teachers are accessing or using this data to inform instruction, for instance. And if we're seeing that it's not often, then we need to understand why. Is it because they don't find it valuable? Is it because they don't understand how to use it? So those are the things that I'm really curious about. And then other types of data that would dig into that value add piece. So as you guys are thinking about that conversation for spring, I would just ask to consider having some type of feedback system either ready to present to us in the spring with the responses, or just at least having something to present, say like, hey, we're thinking of doing this, next year. These are the types of questions we're considering asking. So, I'll leave that up to you guys. You guys are the experts in how this all works, but just some thoughts I had.
Yep, we will absolutely include that, especially if we do decide to make some changes. We'll want to make sure we understand why those changes are being made and whether or not that's going to meet the needs of the teachers, or are we just making one more arbitrary change. So very fair. We'll make sure we cover it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, that was all for me. I really appreciate, again, the depth of knowledge presented here today, the systems. I think that we're setting our students up for success, and I'm excited to see what this looks like in the future. Are there any additional comments or questions? All right, well, that was pretty easy. Hearing none, we will go ahead and